I never thought there would come a day when my own parents would do that to my grandmother. They called it a new trend, a little joke. But when Grandma walked into Dad's birthday party, her head shaved bald, trembling amidst the lights and forced laughter, I knew this was no longer a family. And from that moment, I decided I would never let anyone hurt her again. Hello, my name is Micah Sterling. I'm 25 years old, living in a small apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the city's pace is just lively enough to keep me from feeling lost, yet calm enough for me to breathe. I'm a marketing specialist, spending most of my time coming up with advertising ideas to help small brands stand out in the crowd. My work keeps me busy, but I enjoy the sense of freedom that comes with managing everything on my own. From utility bills to quiet evenings sitting by the window watching the city lights flicker like lost stars. Charlotte is no stranger to me. It's where I grew up, where my childhood memories were woven from sun-drenched summer days, oak-lined streets, and the smell of freshly baked cookies wafting from Grandma Opal's kitchen. She is the person I love most in the world, the gentle light of my early years. My grandfather, who passed away 3 years ago, was an inseparable part of those memories. He taught me how to tie my shoelaces, how to peel an apple without cutting myself, and how to listen to Grandma's stories without interrupting, no matter how long-winded they were. "Micah," he'd say in his warm, deep voice, "you have to cherish what people tell you because every story is a piece of their life." I still remember every word he said as if they were carved into my heart. When Grandpa passed away, it felt like a part of my world collapsed. He left quietly on an autumn morning when golden leaves blanketed the path to their small suburban Charlotte home. Grandma Opal sat by his side, holding his hand until the very end, her eyes brimming with tears but still managing a smile. "He's just gone ahead, Micah," she said to me, her voice trembling. "One day I'll see him again." I didn't know how to respond, so I just hugged her tightly, hoping my warmth could ease the pain I knew she was hiding. After Grandpa's death, my parents, Clifford Sterling and Joanne Sterling, decided to have Grandma Opal move in with them at their small house in downtown Charlotte, where they ran a little coffee shop called Sterling's Brew. The cafe was their pride and joy, though it never brought in much money. Their income was just enough to get by, and sometimes I'd hear Mom complain about the piling bills while Dad was always busy with numbers and ledgers. I didn't get too involved in their affairs, having moved out at 20, determined to live independently and not be a burden. But when I heard Grandma Opal would be living with them, I felt relieved. I thought, at least she wouldn't have to face loneliness in the house filled with memories of her and Grandpa. Grandma Opal is an extraordinary woman. Though she's over 70, she retains a sharpness and gentleness I've always admired. Her silver-white hair, shoulder-length and meticulously combed, would shimmer in the sunlight, making her look like a fairy from the bedtime stories she used to tell me. She loved Grandpa with a deep, unwavering love, and I knew their old house, where I used to run around the garden, was her entire world. It was where she and Grandpa built their life, raised my dad and my uncle, who now lives abroad, and lived through the joys and storms of life. So when she decided to sell that house, I was stunned. "Grandma, why would you sell it?" I asked, my voice breaking as I stood in front of the house, now marked with a sold sign. She just smiled, her eyes gleaming with trust. "Micah, I want your parents to have an easier life. This money will help them take good care of me, and I don't want to live alone anymore. I need a family." I looked at her, my heart swelling with respect. She had sacrificed the place that held her entire life, just for the hope that our family would come together, that she would be loved and cared for the way she had always cared for us. After receiving the money from the sale, a significant sum, Grandma handed it all to my parents. I still remember the way Mom's eyes lit up when she received it, and Dad, usually a man of few words, patted Grandma's shoulder and told her she had nothing to worry about. "We'll take care of you, Mom. Don't worry," he said firmly. I believed them. I believed they would use the money to do good things, to care for Grandma the way she deserved. I thought with her there our family would become a home again, like the days when I was a child, when everyone gathered around the dinner table laughing and talking lively. But I was wrong. Cracks, however small, began to appear like fractures in thin glass, just waiting for a blow to shatter completely. At first, everything seemed fine. I often visited my parents and Grandma, bringing pastries or coffee from my favorite shop to share. Grandma Opal always greeted me with a warm hug, and we'd talk for hours about my work or the old stories she'd tell and retell. I never tired of listening to her, even if I knew every detail by heart. But I noticed not everyone in the house was as patient as I was. My mom, Joanne, started to complain. Her remarks, seemingly harmless, cut like a knife. "She's old, always going on about the same old stories. It's exhausting," she muttered once while Grandma Opal was recounting her and Grandpa's wedding day. I looked at Mom, trying to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just tired from the cafe. But then I saw Dad change too. He'd scowl when Grandma slowly descended the stairs or when she accidentally dropped a cup in the kitchen. "Be careful, Mom, things in this house aren't cheap," he'd say coldly. A chill ran down my spine. That wasn't the Dad I knew, the man who used to joke with me when I was little, who proudly boasted about having an amazing mother like Grandma Opal. During my subsequent visits, I began to sense a strange atmosphere, as if an invisible curtain was slowly descending, shrouding the warmth that once filled my parents' home. Initially, I had been relieved when Grandma Opal moved in with them. I thought that with the money she gave them from selling her memory-filled house, they would care for her properly, as she deserved. I envisioned lively family dinners filled with laughter, with Grandma at the head of the table recounting stories about Grandpa while my parents listened with respect. But reality was far different, and the first cracks began to show, small but sharp, like needles piercing my heart. My father, Clifford, was never one to openly express his emotions, but now I saw him growing increasingly irritable. During meals, when Grandma Opal slowly chewed her small bites, he would sigh, his brows tightly furrowed. "Mom, eat a little faster, we still have to clean up," he said, his voice barely concealing his frustration. I looked at Grandma and saw her trembling hands set down her chopsticks, a flicker of hurt in her eyes before she forced a strained smile. "I'm old and slow, causing trouble for you all," she said, her voice as soft as a passing breeze. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but my throat felt blocked. I couldn't understand how Dad could speak to her like that, the mother he once proudly called the strongest woman in the world. My mother, Joanne, was even worse. She had always been sharp and quick-witted, but now that sharpness had turned into biting complaints. One time, when Grandma Opal accidentally turned the TV volume up louder than usual to hear the news, Mom stormed into the room, hands on her hips, her voice harsh. "Mom, why is the TV so loud? Are you trying to let the whole neighborhood hear it?" Grandma Opal hurriedly grabbed the remote, fumbling to lower the volume, apologizing repeatedly. I sat there, feeling a surge of heat rise in my chest. It was just a TV, just a bit of sound, yet Mom acted as if Grandma had committed some grave offense. What hurt me most was how Mom treated Grandma's efforts. Grandma Opal had always been self-sufficient. Back in her old house, she cooked delicious meals, tended to her small vegetable garden, did her own laundry, and kept the house spotless. But now, every time she tried to help, Mom dismissed her as if she were a clueless child. One afternoon, I watched as Grandma quietly picked up a knife to peel some apples for me, just like she used to when I was little. Mom walked in, snatched the knife from her hands, and said coldly, "Mom, leave it, don't do that." "What if you cut yourself? Who's going to deal with it?" Grandma Opal stood there, her hands empty, her eyes lost, as if something precious had been taken from her. "I just wanted to do something for Micah," she said, her voice so soft I had to strain to hear it. Mom didn't respond, just turned away, leaving Grandma standing silently in the kitchen. Family dinners, once the moments I looked forward to most, had become a source of dread. Grandma Opal ate less and less, often picking at a few pieces of vegetables or a spoonful of mashed potatoes before sitting quietly, listening to my parents discuss money. Their conversations always revolved around the cafe's lackluster revenue, mounting bills, or the cost of home repairs. Once I overheard Mom hinting, her tone laced with implication. Taking care of an elderly person is such a burden, so costly in every way. Even money isn't enough. I saw Grandma Opal's hand freeze, her spoon hovering in midair. Her eyes flickered with sadness, as if those words had struck a deep wound in her heart. She had given my parents all the money from selling her house, her and Grandpa's entire world, and yet they still called her a burden. I couldn't bear the helplessness I felt. One evening I sat with Grandma in the living room. The soft glow of the yellow lamp illuminated her face, highlighting the wrinkles etched by time and pain. I held her hand, frail but still warm, just like when I was a child. "Grandma," I said, my voice trembling, "if you're not comfortable here, you can come live with me. My apartment is small, but it's enough for the two of us. I'll take care of you." I looked into her eyes, hoping to see a spark, a sign that she'd agree. But she only smiled, shaking her head gently. "Micah, you have your own life, your work, your friends, your future. I don't want to be a burden to you." She squeezed my hand, her voice choking. "I'm fine. As long as I can see you like this, I'm happy." But I knew she wasn't fine. I saw how she withdrew, how she smiled less, how she stared out the window with distant eyes, as if searching for a place that no longer existed. A sense of unease grew within me, like a storm quietly forming, waiting to erupt. I started to wonder, where had the money Grandma gave my parents gone? Why were they still complaining about finances, still as stressed as ever? And why, with Grandma there, did this house feel colder than ever? That night, as I drove back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the image of Grandma Opal sitting quietly in the corner of the room, her hands clasped tightly as if holding on to the last scraps of her dignity. I realized as clearly as the headlights cutting through the night that my parents no longer saw caring for her as a responsibility. To them, she was no longer the respected mother or grandmother, but a burden. An inconvenience they had to endure after taking the money she had sacrificed her entire life to give them. I gripped the steering wheel, anger and helplessness surging within me. But I never imagined that just a few days later everything would shatter like a glass ball. During an evening I thought would be a warm family reunion. That weekend, my parents hosted a small party at their house. They said it was an occasion to gather a few relatives and close friends to liven up the atmosphere after stressful days working at the cafe. I arrived early, bringing a bottle of wine and a box of pastries from Grandma Opal's favorite bakery, hoping to see her smile like she used to. As I stepped into the house, the delicious aroma of food from the kitchen brought a fleeting smile to my face. The dining table was carefully set with a pale green tablecloth and the white porcelain plates my mother always cherished. The lively chatter and laughter of the first guests filled the air, and I thought, maybe today would be a good day. But then, when Grandma Opal emerged from the back room, my heart seemed to stop. I was frozen in place. Her silver white hair, shoulder length, once shimmering in the sunlight like a gentle halo, the hair Grandpa used to say was her most beautiful feature, was gone. In its place was a bald scalp, speckled with fresh red scratches, as if it had been shaved roughly without a shred of care. She wore a thin scarf, but it was too flimsy to hide the cruel truth. She walked slowly, her back slightly hunched, her trembling hands clutching the edges of the scarf as if afraid it would slip off. She tucked herself into a corner of the table, avoiding everyone's gazes, her eyes red-rimmed and glistening with unspoken pain. I stood there, unable to believe my eyes. The world seemed to slow down, the laughter and chatter of the guests fading into meaningless, distant noise. I looked at Grandma, the woman who had been a symbol of strength and gentleness in my heart, now appearing smaller and more fragile than ever. The people around began to whisper. "What happened to Grandma Opal?" a cousin asked quietly, her voice tinged with curiosity and surprise. "My goodness, did she shave her head? How strange. a friend of my mother's murmured, trying to suppress a smile. My father, Clifford, was quick to respond, his tone as casual as if he were talking about the weather. It's the new trend. Bald is neat and hassle-free. My mother, Joanne, was even worse. She let out a loud, cold laugh that cut into my heart like a knife. Exactly. She's old, why keep long hair? It's messy. Shaving it off is cool and trendy. A few guests chuckled along, thinking it was a harmless joke. But I saw Grandma Opal lower her head, her hands gripping the thin scarf tightly, her frail fingers trembling as if trying to hold on to the last remnants of her dignity. A single tear rolled silently down her cheek, so quick that no one noticed, except me. I was stunned, unable to believe my parents saw this as a joke. That hair wasn't just hair. To Grandma, it was a keepsake, a memory of Grandpa who used to sit with her on quiet evenings, stroking her hair and telling her she was most beautiful when her silver strands glowed in the sunlight. I still remember as a child sitting beside her, watching her brush her hair, each silver strand sparkling like something out of a fairy tale. It was a part of her, a part of Grandpa, a part of the happy days she had sacrificed her entire home to preserve in the hope of having a family. And now, my parents had taken that away from her, without the slightest hint of remorse. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. It wasn't just anger, but a deep, searing pain, as if I too had been insulted alongside Grandma. Grandma Opal couldn't eat. She just sat there, quietly wiping away tears, trying to hide her humiliation. The mocking laughter of my parents and the guests rang out like daggers, each word a cut into her dignity. I couldn't stand still for another second. My feet moved on their own, bringing me closer to her. A surge of intense emotion welling up, impossible to suppress. "What did you do to Grandma?" I said loudly, my voice trembling with anger, cutting through the laughter and chatter in the room. The entire party fell silent in an instant, as if the air had been sucked out. All eyes turned to me, awkward smiles fading from the guests' lips. "You think shaving her head is a joke? Fashion? What did she do to deserve this?" I pointed at Grandma Opal, who kept her head bowed, her hands clutching the thin scarf as if it were her last shield of protection. My father, Clifford, his face flushed red, stood up abruptly, the chair behind him scraping with a harsh clatter. "Micah, how dare you speak to your parents like that? Disrespectful. Don't you know how to behave in front of others?" He roared, his voice thundering, but I didn't flinch. My mother, Joanne, chimed in, her tone sharp as a blade. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Micah. It's just some hair, what's the big deal? Do you want the whole family to see us as the bad guys?" Her words poured fuel on the fire within me. They didn't apologize, showed no remorse, only turned to blame me, as if I were the one ruining the party, the insolent one daring to question them. I looked around, seeing the curious, uncomfortable gazes of relatives and friends. Some lowered their heads, avoiding my eyes, but no one spoke up for Grandma. Their silence was another dagger, confirming that to them, this was just a small matter. But to me, it was an unforgivable insult. I turned back, took Grandma Opal's hand, and said coldly but firmly, "Grandma, let's go." I helped her stand, walking past the stunned gazes and fading whispers behind us. Grandma didn't resist, letting me lead her by the hand. The party's lively atmosphere continued, but no one said anything. I didn't care anymore. All I knew was that I had to get her out of that place immediately. On the drive back to my apartment, the air in the car felt suffocatingly heavy. Grandma Opal sat beside me, her head resting against the window, her eyes staring into the dark as if searching for something lost. The thin scarf on her head fluttered, a cruel reminder of the pain she carried. I wanted to say something, to ask her what happened, but my throat felt choked. When we arrived at my small apartment, the warm yellow light wasn't enough to dispel the coldness in my heart. I pulled out a chair for her to sit, my voice gentle. "Grandma, rest a bit. I'll order some food." I ordered 2 servings of roast chicken and mashed potatoes from her favorite diner, then hurriedly tidied the sofa, grabbing blankets and pillows to make a comfortable spot for her. While waiting for the food, I sat beside her, holding her frail hand. "Grandma, what happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. I needed the truth, though I feared it would hurt even more. Grandma Opal was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on her clasped hands in her lap. Then she sighed, her voice choked but clear. "Micah, it wasn't a joke. Your parents, they've been frustrated with me for a while. They said I was a burden, an extra weight in the house. That day, your mother said my hair was messy, an embarrassment to the family. Your father, he took clippers and shaved it all off, saying it was to teach me to be neat. I tried to stop him, but I wasn't strong enough. My blood felt like it froze. My mind reeled, unable to believe that my parents, the people who raised me, could do this to her. Shaving her head wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of humiliation, a way to vent their frustration, to assert control over the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for them. I wanted to scream, to rush back to their house and confront them, but when I looked into Grandma's red, teary eyes, I held back. She didn't need more anger. She needed me here, a safe place. When the food arrived, I set the table, trying to create a warm atmosphere. Grandma ate little, picking at a few bites, but I saw her eyes soften as I talked about work, trying to make her smile with trivial stories. Afterward, I led her to the sofa, wrapped her in a blanket, and played soft music she loved. "Rest, Grandma. I'm right here," I said, then sat on the floor beside her like I used to when I was a child. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind swirled with images of Grandma Opal and the words she'd shared. I thought of her silver hair, the memories of Grandpa, the money she sacrificed, and how my parents had treated her. Another fire ignited in me, but this time it wasn't just anger. It was resolve. I wouldn't let her suffer anymore. I would seek justice for her, even if it meant facing my own family. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, but it couldn't dispel the coldness in my heart. Grandma Opal was still sleeping soundly on the sofa, her face gentler in her dreams, as if she had returned to the happy days with Grandpa. I gently tucked the blanket around her, brewed a strong black coffee, and drove straight to my parents' house. My heart pounded, not out of fear, but from a suppressed rage ready to erupt. I knew this confrontation wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared. When I pushed open the door, the house still carried the faint smell of wine and food from last night's party. My parents were at the kitchen table, Dad flipping through a newspaper, Mom sipping tea, as if everything was just a passing breeze. They looked up at me, their eyes briefly flashing with surprise before settling into indifference. "Back already? Didn't cause enough trouble last night?" Mom asked, her voice sharp as if she'd bitten into a lemon. I stood tall, took a deep breath, and said firmly, "I'm here to collect Grandma's things. From now on, she's living with me. I'll take care of her myself because that's my responsibility and my love for her." I looked straight into their eyes, waiting for an apology, a hint of remorse. But there was none. My father, Clifford, set the newspaper down and smirked, his eyes glinting with sarcasm. "Oh, responsibility? Love? Sounds noble, Micah. Try taking care of an old lady and let's see if you'll cry over that grand love of yours." He emphasized love as if it were a joke, each word piercing my heart like a needle. My mother, Joanne, leaned forward, hands on the table, her half-smile cutting like a blade. "Oh, wonderful, my dear son. So you think you're a hero taking Grandma away to spare us the hassle, huh? You think it's that easy to care for her, don't you? Give it a week and you'll come running back begging for my help." She raised an eyebrow, her tone challenging, as if I were a naive child taking on something beyond my capacity. I clenched my fists, struggling to contain the anger boiling in my chest. "Grandma isn't a hassle," I said coldly. "She's family. But maybe you've forgotten that after taking all the money from the sale of her house." I saw Mom falter, her eyes flickering with unease. But Dad just laughed louder, as if I'd told a hilarious joke. "Oh, now you're preaching morality to your parents," Dad said, his voice dropping into a mocking tone. "Take her then." and all that old junk. It'll surely stabilize your life. From now on, she's your burden." He waved his hand toward the room where Grandma used to stay. I didn't respond, unwilling to waste words on them. I walked into Grandma Opal's former room, packing her things with the care of handling fragments of a precious painting. The old sweater she knitted herself, the woolen scarf she wore on winter days, the notebook filled with her recipes, and the photo of Grandpa, his gentle smile looking at me from the worn wooden frame. Each item was a piece of memory, a part of her soul I couldn't bear to leave in this place. My parents stood at the doorway, their eyes fixed on me, but I didn't look at them. I focused solely on packing, as if I were rescuing Grandma from a place no longer worthy of her. As I carried the bags to the car, Mom called after me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Good luck, Micah. Don't forget to call when you get tired." I didn't turn back, just slammed the car door and drove straight to my apartment. When I got there, Grandma Opal was awake, sitting by the window with a cup of tea in her hands, her eyes distant. I set the bags down, sat beside her, and recounted everything, from the brief confrontation to my parents' biting sarcasm. She listened, her eyes gradually reddening. "My dear," she said, her voice trembling, "it breaks my heart to be rejected by my own flesh and blood like this, but I feel warmth because I still have you. You're my last refuge." She held my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks, a mix of pain from betrayal and gratitude for my unconditional love. I hugged her, feeling the warmth from her frail frame, my heart heavy yet somehow lighter. In the first few days, I busied myself arranging everything to make Grandma feel comfortable. I tidied up a corner of the kitchen, setting up a small wooden table where she could chop vegetables, knead dough, or cook the dishes she loved. I also brought home an old armchair from a second-hand shop and placed it by the large window, where morning sunlight streamed in, casting golden patches on the wooden floor. "Grandma, you can sit here to read or knit," I said, pulling the chair closer so she could see the oak trees lining the street. She smiled, her hands gently caressing the chair as if it were a precious gift. "You're so thoughtful, Micah," she said, her voice warm, and I saw her eyes light up, free from the fearfulness they held during her time at my parents' house. Our life together began with simple things. In the mornings, I brewed coffee for myself and tea for her, and we'd sit at the kitchen table talking about everything, from her old stories about Grandpa to my busy days at the company. She loved recounting how Grandpa taught me to fish at the lake near their house, though I never caught a single one. "You kept jumping around, scaring all the fish away," she said with a laugh, and I laughed along, my heart feeling light, as if I were a child again. In the afternoons, we cooked together. She taught me how to make the butter cookies Grandpa loved, the scent of flour and brown sugar filling the apartment. Some days I took her to the nearby park where she enjoyed sitting on a bench, watching children play and telling me about the flowers she used to grow. Day by day, I saw Grandma Opal's smile return. Her eyes no longer darted away, no longer carried the shrinking fear of bothering someone. Instead, there was a sense of peace, as if she had rediscovered herself after months of being treated like a burden. One evening, as she sat knitting under the soft glow of the lamp, she looked up at me, her voice gentle. "Micah, I never thought I'd get to live like this again." "Thank you." I only nodded, my throat tight, unable to find words beyond holding her hand, feeling its warmth as a reassurance that I was doing the right thing. But amidst those warm moments, a new worry began to creep into my mind. Life wasn't just about joyful meals or leisurely walks. The costs of living, medications, and doctor's visits for Grandma were starting to weigh heavily. I worked in marketing, and my salary was enough for a single life, but now, with Grandma, things were getting tight. I began calculating every cent, cutting back on non-essentials, the coffee shop visits, the new clothes I used to enjoy. Many nights I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with numbers. Could I care for her as well as she deserved? Could I be strong enough to never let her feel like a burden the way my parents had? I didn't dare let Grandma see my worries. Each morning I still smiled, brewed her tea, and shared funny stories. But deep down, I knew I was walking a challenging path. I only prayed I'd have the strength to keep my promise to her, that she would always be loved, cherished, and able to live as her true self. My small apartment, though warmed by Grandma's laughter and the smell of her freshly baked cookies, couldn't hide the stack of bills piling up on my desk. Medications, groceries, and regular health checkups for her all felt like heavy stones pressing down on my shoulders every night. I didn't regret bringing Grandma to live with me, but sometimes in the darkness I wondered how far I could stretch my modest salary as a recent graduate. Grandma Opal, with the sensitivity of someone seasoned by life, seemed to sense my unspoken worries. I began to notice it in her quiet glances, in the way she ate less to save food, or when she refused the small gifts I wanted to buy to cheer her up. "I don't need anything, Micah," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Having you here is enough." Those words made my heart ache. She was trying to protect me as she always had, even though she was the one who needed shielding. One weekend morning, as pale sunlight bathed Charlotte, Grandma Opal looked up from her armchair by the window where she was knitting. "Micah," she called, her voice soft but carrying something different. "Would you take me to see the old house? The one your grandpa and I had in the suburbs." I was surprised looking at her. That house had been sold long ago, now belonging to another family. I worried she'd feel heartbroken seeing the place that was once her entire world now in someone else's hands. But her eyes, though gentle, held an undeniable resolve. "All right, Grandma," I said, smiling. "We'll go this afternoon." That afternoon I drove her to the suburbs, where winding roads snaked through rows of old oak trees. The old house came into view, still rustic with its white picket fence and small garden, though now adorned with a new swing and unfamiliar flower pots. I parked the car and helped Grandma step out. She stood silently at the gate, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes scanning every corner of the house as if searching for fragments of memories. "Do you remember," she said, her voice wistful, "how you used to run around the garden chasing butterflies and your grandpa would pretend to be a monster to scare you?" I smiled, feeling as if I were pulled back to those sun-drenched summer afternoons when Grandma sat on the porch telling fairy tales, and Grandpa hoisted me onto his shoulders, teaching me how to spot rain clouds. We stood there for a long time, reminiscing about those beautiful memories. She talked about their simple dinners when Grandpa always insisted on washing the dishes so she could rest. She pointed to a corner of the garden where I once fell while trying to climb a tree, and she had rushed out, scooping me into her arms to comfort me even though my knee was only slightly scraped. "Those days, I thought they'd last forever," she said, her voice catching. I held her hand, feeling her frail fingers tremble. "Grandma, those memories aren't gone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're still here, in your heart and mine." Then she asked to visit the cemetery where Grandpa rested. I drove through quiet roads, my heart heavy. The cemetery lay peacefully under the shade of vibrant red maples, the air still as if cradling untold stories. I helped Grandma walk to Grandpa's grave, where a stone marker bore his name, James Sterling, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. She knelt down, placing a small bouquet of white daisies on the grave, her trembling hands touching the stone. I stood behind, silent, giving her space to be with him. In the quiet stillness, she took my hand and pulled me to sit beside her. "Micah," she said, her voice choked but resolute, "I have something to tell you." I looked at her, my heart pounding, sensing a great secret was about to be revealed. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto mine as if entrusting her entire life to me. "Before your grandpa passed, he left me a hidden inheritance. A piece of property in the suburbs and an investment savings fund. No one in the family knew, not even your father. Your grandpa kept it secret because he was afraid the family would fight over it, that they wouldn't value what he left behind." I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. "Grandma, are you serious?" I stammered, my mind reeling. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I kept it secret to prevent the family from falling apart. But after everything that's happened, I know you're the only one, only you, Micah, who will honor and use your grandpa's legacy properly. I want you to know the truth." She squeezed my hand, her voice trembling but filled with trust. "Your grandpa would smile knowing I'm passing it to you." I sat there, a storm of emotions swirling within me. I was moved by Grandma's love and trust, by the fact that Grandpa's legacy, the man I respected most, still lived on in such an unexpected way. But at the same time, I felt a heavy weight. This inheritance could change our lives entirely, allowing me to care for Grandma better, but it was also like a ticking bomb, ready to explode if it fell into the hands of people like my parents. A few days later, Grandma Opal called me over to her armchair by the window, where she often sat knitting under the sunlight. "Micah," she said, her voice firm yet gentle, "I've thought it through. I want to transfer all of Grandpa's estate to you. You'll have full control because I trust you'll do what he would have wanted." I was stunned, wanting to refuse, feeling unworthy of such a monumental responsibility. But her eyes, both resolute and filled with trust, made it impossible to say no. "Grandma, I won't let you down," I said, my voice catching. She smiled, gently patting my hand as if entrusting me with her and Grandpa's entire world. I didn't hesitate. With that estate, I immediately searched for a spacious house in suburban Charlotte, a quiet place with a small garden and large windows to let in the sunlight. It was somewhere Grandma could live comfortably, safely, and receive proper medical care in her final years. I pictured her sitting on the porch, knitting, reading, or tending to a few flower pots like she used to. When I signed the contract to buy the house, I felt a weight lift, as if I had repaid a fraction of the emotional debt I owed to her and Grandpa. On moving day, Grandma Opal walked slowly, touching every corner of the house, her eyes sparkling as if she had rediscovered a piece of her lost memories. "Micah, you've made me feel alive again," she said, and I could only hug her, tears falling silently. But that joy didn't last long. News of Grandma Opal's unexpected estate spread like wildfire among the family. Just a few weeks later, my parents, Clifford and Joanne, showed up at the new house unannounced. I opened the door to find Dad standing there, hands in his pockets, a sardonic half-smile on his face. "Well, Micah, you've moved up in the world, haven't you? A fancy house like this, all thanks to your love for Grandma, right?" He emphasized love as if it were a joke. Mom chimed in, her voice sweet but icy. "I thought you were all about preaching morality, but turns out you're pretty clever. Coaxing a frail old lady to sign over everything to you? Well played, son." I clenched my fists, struggling to stay calm. "This was Grandma's wish," I said coldly. "She trusts me because I don't see her as a burden." But Mom laughed loudly as if I'd said something absurd. "Her wish? Oh, Micah, don't be so naive. She's old, her mind's muddled. Whatever you say, she'll believe. But that estate belongs to the family, not just you. Don't think you can keep it all or we'll see you in court." Dad nodded, his eyes darkening. "Exactly. You think you can outsmart the whole family? We'll sue to take back what's ours." Grandma Opal, standing behind me, heard everything. Her hands trembled, her eyes red, not from fear but from pain. "Clifford, Joanne," she said, her voice choking, "you're my flesh and blood, but how could you think my mind is muddled? I just wanted to preserve what your father left behind, and yet you're fighting over it." She turned away, tears streaming down her face, the disappointment etched deeply into her expression. I helped her sit down, my heart twisting in pain. It didn't stop there. Uncle Henry, my rarely seen uncle who lived abroad, caught wind of the news and rushed back, joining the opposition. He showed up at my house the next day, his tone smooth but unable to mask his greed. "Micah, I hear you're the big heir now, huh?" he said with a fake smile. "Your grandparents' estate should be split evenly among their children, not handed entirely to a grandson. Let's be fair, nephew." I looked at him, feeling as though my entire family was turning against me, not out of love but out of greed. The pressure from my own flesh and blood weighed on me like a boulder. My parents kept calling, sometimes mocking, sometimes threatening, even sending warning letters through a lawyer. Uncle Henry rallied relatives, stirring up claims that I had manipulated Grandma Opal to seize the estate. But every time I looked at Grandma, now peacefully sitting in the garden tending to her daisy pots, I found strength. "This is Grandma's wish," I repeated, not just to them but to myself. "I'll fight to the end to protect her honor and her rights." A legal and moral battle within the family began to take shape. I knew the days ahead would be tense, filled with unrelenting struggles. But as I held Grandma Opal's hand, feeling the warmth of her frail fingers, I knew I wasn't alone. I would fight, not just for her, but for what Grandpa left behind, for the true love this family had lost. The lawsuit quickly went to court, and the story of a family suing each other over an inheritance became the talk of Charlotte. Neighbors, old friends, and even regular customers at my parents' cafe whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with curiosity and pity. I didn't care about the gossip. My only goal was to protect Grandma, her wishes, and Grandpa's legacy. But every time I saw her sitting quietly in our new home, her eyes tinged with sadness when she thought of her children, my heart felt crushed. She didn't say it aloud, but I knew she was heartbroken, not just because of the lawsuit, but because of the betrayal by her own flesh and blood. On the day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy like a storm waiting to break. My parents, Clifford and Joanne, sat across from me alongside Uncle Henry, their eyes cold as if I were the enemy. Dad crossed his arms, his face flushed, muttering something to Mom, glaring at me with resentment. Mom smirked, murmuring just loud enough for me to hear, "The kid thinks he can beat the whole family?" Uncle Henry, dressed impeccably in a suit, sat upright, but his fingers tapped restlessly on the table, betraying his unease. My lawyer, a calm, middle-aged man, presented medical records, reports from doctors confirming that Grandma Opal was fully lucid, with no signs of confusion or memory decline. Mrs. Opal Sterling willingly and knowingly transferred the estate to her grandson, Micah Sterling, he said, his voice steady. Dad snorted, shaking his head, muttering, "Lucid? She's been manipulated by him." Mom glanced over, adding in a mocking tone, "Oh, what a brilliant old lady, handing everything to her golden grandson." Then it was Grandma Opal's turn. She stepped up to the witness stand, her hands trembling but her back straight, exuding resilience despite her frail frame. "I gave the estate to Micah because I trust him," she said, her voice choked but clear, resonating through the courtroom. "I'm not confused. I knew what I was doing, but my children..." She paused, taking a deep breath, her eyes red. "Clifford, Joanne, and even Henry, you treated me like a burden, like an inconvenience. You weren't just indifferent. You were cruel." She removed the cloth cap she was wearing, revealing her bald scalp, the faded but still visible red scratches stark against her skin. The courtroom fell silent, save for a few gasps. "This is what my son and daughter-in-law did to me," she said, her voice trembling. "Just because I didn't obey, because they thought I was a nuisance in their home." My eyes stung with tears. The room, from the judge to the audience, was hushed, some wiping their eyes. Dad bowed his head, clenching his fists, his face red as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Mom turned her face away, lips pursed, but I saw her shoulders tremble, as if shaken by Grandma's words. Uncle Henry slammed his hand on the table, muttering, "Mom, how could you do this to me? That estate belongs to the whole family." But his voice faltered, no longer confident. Grandma's words were not just an accusation, but a dagger cutting through their greed and hypocrisy. I wanted to run to her and hug her, but I stayed seated, gripping the chair tightly, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and pain. The court ultimately ruled in our favor. The transfer of the estate was entirely legal, and I was the rightful heir with full authority to manage it. My parents and Uncle Henry left the courtroom with defeated expressions, their eyes filled with resentment but no words left to say. Some relatives who had sided with them began to look at me differently. One aunt pulled me aside, her voice soft. "Micah, I'm sorry. I didn't understand the whole story. You did the right thing." Those words didn't erase the pain, but I felt a belated awakening of conscience. I didn't feel triumphant. As I held Grandma Opal's hand leaving the courtroom, I felt an odd sense of calm. She looked at me, giving a faint smile, her hand squeezing mine as if to say she was proud. I knew from then on I would dedicate the days ahead to ensuring she lived with love and dignity as she deserved. As we stepped out of the courthouse, sunlight bathed her face and I saw a spark in her eyes, as if she had rediscovered herself. In the months following the trial, our spacious house in suburban Charlotte became a true home for Grandma and me. Each morning I woke to the scent of chamomile tea she brewed, her soft humming of an old song in the kitchen, and sunlight streaming through the windows, casting golden patches on the wooden floor. We lived simply but with abundant joy. I helped her plant white daisies in the garden, just like the ones she used to tend with Grandpa. Grandma Opal no longer had the fearful, shrinking look she once did. Instead, she radiated bright smiles, her eyes sparkling whenever she shared old stories or when we baked cookies together, laughing loudly as I clumsily spilled flour across the table. Grandma Opal often sat on the porch knitting or reading, her eyes serene as if she had rediscovered meaning in her final years. "Micah," she once said, her voice gentle, "I'm no longer weighed down by darkness. Thanks to you, I feel this life is still worth living." Those words were like a precious gift, making me realize that the responsibility I carried was not just a burden but a source of happiness. I looked at her, seeing the resilience and boundless love she had for me, and I knew I had done the right thing. I, a 25-year-old once caught up in work and personal dreams, had grown noticeably. I learned to be a steady anchor, not just for Grandma, but for myself. Facing my parents and Uncle Henry taught me that sometimes to protect those you love, you must have the courage to say no to your own family. Those days showed me that true love isn't found in blood ties or lofty words, but in actions. The quiet deeds done to protect and cherish one another. My parents, Clifford and Joanne, and Uncle Henry gradually accepted their defeat. Mom grew quieter at the cafe, her eyes avoiding regular customers. Dad often sat alone, flipping through ledgers with a pensive look. Uncle Henry hurriedly returned abroad without a goodbye. They didn't change completely, but the truth laid bare in court stripped them of control. I heard from our neighbor, Mrs. Lena, that customers at Sterling's Brew began whispering, "How could they treat their own mother like that?" Some of my parents' old friends stopped visiting the cafe. Mr. Tom, a longtime regular, once shook his head in front of Mom. "Joanne, I'm so disappointed. Opal deserves better." The close-knit Charlotte community began to look at my parents with distant eyes, a reminder that their actions not only hurt Grandma but also cost them the trust of those around them. I don't know if they truly reflected on themselves, but I hoped that somewhere deep inside a spark of conscience had been awakened. One peaceful afternoon, as the sunset painted the garden golden, Grandma Opal and I sat on the porch of our new home. She held my hand, her eyes twinkling like sunlight reflecting on a lake. "Maybe your grandpa is smiling," she said softly, her voice warm. "He knows he made the right choice trusting you." I squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth spread, and smiled. In that moment, I knew every hardship, every battle had been worth it. True love doesn't lie in blood ties or eloquent words, but in the actions that protect and cherish one another. And sometimes to protect those we love, we must have the courage to say no to our own family.